The drive to change governance of the Boston Public Schools is gaining momentum. Two city councilors have filed a home rule petition for restructuring the school committee that's currently appointed by the mayor. There's also a petition drive by parent activists and community leaders who want to let voters express their preference with an advisory question. To tell us about the efforts are a member of the Boston Coalition for Educational Equity, Lisa Green, and the education chair for the Boston NAACP, Jose Lopez. I'd like to thank you both very much for being with us.
Thanks for having us, Chris.
I'd like to start with Jose Lopez. The debate about the Boston School Committee, who should control it and how it should be structured, that has really been going on for decades. So what I see here is something about the moment that people are seizing. How would you describe this moment right now in Boston?
Sure, thank you, Chris. Quite frankly, this is a response to the many community level folk who have really driven this effort, who have seized an opportunity to really question whether or not the governance of the school committee in Boston should change. And I think that they've been clear that it should. I think that they're clear about the reasons why, which quite frankly just have to do with democracy. And they've been clear that they will get it done by any means necessary.
Lisa Green, I want to ask you about what you think is driving this, because there are certainly instances where this committee or maybe the people who control the committee have made some moves in very progressive directions. There's a lot of talk about equity, at least, social and emotional well-being of students. What's the main problem with this committee?
Well, Chris, it's about representation, right? Representatives that you choose for yourself are going to be different than representatives that somebody else chooses for you. There's nothing like the accountability of a member, a representative decision maker who you have to vote for. And I think, the public dissatisfaction with the current governance structure, which has been around for years, right? Civil rights activists and education activists, voting rights folks have been talking about this for a long time, but it's reached a tipping point recently, right? Over the past couple of years, there have been instances where, whether it's Build BPS, school closures, the McCormick, all of those are situations that people keenly felt that their school committee members weren't responsive and weren't accountable. And then this recent exam school issue, the exam school policy, which we fully support, and some of the decisions around school reopenings, right, animated another segment of the population to be very dissatisfied with the school committee. So we have a situation now where there was a recent Globe Suffolk poll that only 6% of likely Boston voters support the current appointed structure. So our rationale for this petition to get a ballot question on right now is to why wait any longer to hear the voice of the people?
Okay. Jose Lopez, when I look at the makeup of the school committee and the backgrounds, I see diversity. I see people who worked in places that are relevant to education or youth development, at least. But at the same time, I don't see a lot of aired differences. I mean, a lot of unanimous votes over the years. What do you make of that?
Sure. What I make of that, Chris, is that and I'll be clear also that these initiatives and my support for these initiatives have nothing to do at all with the quality of the individuals who currently sit at the mayor's pleasure to serve on the Boston School Committee. What I'm concerned about is the future of democracy in the decision-making process around Boston. And the truth is that when we talk about accountability, and for those who say that there is accountability because these individuals are appointed by a mayor who is elected, I remind them that 25% of Bostonians don't choose Boston Public Schools. And so when they're approaching the ballot box, it's hard for me to imagine that on their top 3 issues, on who's and what's driving their choice for mayor, that they're thinking decisions on the school committee in Boston Public Schools. And so the best way to ensure that our communities, our families, and our children are best represented by accountable individuals who have to speak to their electors would be a move to make this either a hybrid or an elected entity. And for me, that's really where our focus has to be, on the future of democracy and the future of decision-making when it comes to our schools.
Mr. Green, certainly elections might be the way to more transparency about the schools, but as Jose pointed out, most people in Boston don't send their kids to public schools, and even most people who were voting. So how do you protect the interests of the schools and the students?
Well, you could say the same thing, right, about a mayoral election, right? It's just the question is, where do you select your representative decision maker, and how do you hold them accountable if they make a decision that doesn't, that you feel doesn't represent the best interests of your community? So I think, Boston over the past several weeks, if you look back at that exam school process, we've proved that we can have a citywide dialogue that's well-informed, that's transparent, that people are willing and able and ready to engage on issues of the public schools. So I think that now is the time to do that, and that decision-making really has to be close enough to you so that you can hold your decision maker accountable. And I think, the folks on the, we've all felt that as activists over the years who are fighting for greater equity, that we couldn't hold our decision makers accountable. Sometimes a school committee member will listen to your testimony, they'll listen to all the evidence, they'll ask great questions, and they will even express some solidarity with you, and then they'll go ahead and vote the other way, right? And there's nothing that you can do about that. So if we get representative decision makers in there, if they vote the other way, we'll be able to vote them out. And I think everybody across the city, that makes sense to them.
Jose Lopez, what should the mayor's part of the equation be? Because, recently we might say, well, the mayor has too much power. But on the other hand, I remember when school committees were still elected, we had mayors who sometimes say, don't blame me, that was the school committee that did it.
Sure. I think our current mayor, Mayor Janey, her position on the question has been great, which is, maybe a hybrid model might be best here. I think for any sitting mayor or any mayor hopeful, I think the question becomes, do you envision a city where your residents and your constituents have an elected body at their school committee, the way almost, I believe, every single school district in the Commonwealth does? And do you want to afford your constituents that opportunity to weigh in and to hold their school leaders accountable? And if you're a mayor that does, then I think you are subscribing to a future that we all want here in the city of Boston. And so, this is about the future of democracy. It's about the future of this school district. It's about a nationwide trend to deliver more accountability and to deliver more access and transparency and democracy to people living everywhere, regardless of their creed, race, or status. And so Boston is now in this area starting to make that turn and provide that opportunity, and we're excited about it.
Mr. Green, what about, please go ahead.
I would only add that I'd ask the question, what makes Boston different than every other municipality in Massachusetts that we can't be trusted to vote for our own representatives on school committee? And I think if you look nationwide, there's a trend in its majority minority cities where this happens. I think that's telling.
Lisa, I want to ask you about the process that you're working on right now, because there are two different tracks going in roughly the same direction. You have a couple of city councilors with a home rule petition on this, but there's also a petition drive. Can you tell me what you're trying to do in the petition drive and what you want people to sign on to?
Yeah, actually, it's not a petition drive. What it is, there's a process for getting an advisory question on the ballot in Boston. And that process starts with only 10 citizens. You only need 10 citizens to sign up for that on that petition to get it onto the agenda for the city council. And then the city council would vote to put it on the ballot. So the city council has to vote for that at least 35 days before the election where it would appear on the ballot. So they have two opportunities. That would be at Wednesday, August 18th meeting, or the meeting in September 15th. So what we're really asking people to do now is, if they support the idea of Boston having a vote on whether we go from an appointed to an elected school committee, they should call or email their city councilors and urge them to vote yes to put that question on the ballot on November 2nd.
Jose Lopez, the ultimate solution here might be more complicated than just all elected versus all appointed. So let's say if it is something in between, don't you need the public to weigh in and take part in the process here to make sure that they get exactly what's needed?
Chris, you're absolutely right, which is exactly why we've proceeded and why the counselors have proceeded in the very deliberate and careful way that they have. Nothing has been decided yet. As a matter of fact, these initiatives, each of them individually and together as a group, are really calling for a citywide process to decide on this question, and then later on, decide on the specifics of what type of school committee would best fit our city moving forward. And I think all of the options would be on the table. The result of this process would be one that is extremely democratic and where constituents are very informed, Chris. I'll remind everyone that the first time this ballot came to Bostonians, I believe the vote was 50% to 49%, a very, very slim margin.
There was a 640 vote margin citywide, 640 votes, yeah.
And in that vote, Chris, there were thousands of ballots that were left blank on this question, which tells me that that means individuals were not informed enough that they could make a decision and be comfortable with. So our work from this point moving forward is to really engage our neighbors, to engage our friends and have conversations about the governance of the school committee so that when this does eventually come to a ballot, our people are informed, they will make conscious decisions, and then the process will be dictated by themselves. And so you're right that it will probably be more complicated than just one or the other, but that's also the beauty in it. Democracy is not easy. Democracy is not simple. It is laborious work, but it is beautiful work that we'll all be proud of looking back.
Finally, Lisa, if people want to get in touch with the coalition and maybe get engaged in this, is there some way they can do that?
Yeah, there is a campaign website set up. It's at electthebsc.org. And you could follow us on Twitter at electthebsc, find us on Facebook and Instagram the same. So we really encourage people, if they want to see this ballot question appear on November's ballot, to get in touch with their city councilors and urge them to vote yes at one of their next 2 meetings to approve it for the ballot.
I'd like to thank you both very much for taking the time to be with us.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. That was Lisa Green from the Boston Coalition for Educational Equity and Jose Lopez from the Boston NAACP. We'll have more news in just a moment.